in the book, that's what we try to posit, Dan and Andrew, is that this isn't about like doing good. It means you can't do well. It's about like, how do we point capitalism, which is, arguably what has made America what it is, but point it to solving societal problems. And it's okay if people do well in that process.
You're listening to the Real Returns podcast, where we learn how real investments can make a real impact. Join your hosts, Andrew and Dan, as they share stories and interview business leaders on how real estate and other forms of investment can create meaningful change for individuals and communities around the world.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Real Returns podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Reichert. I've got my co-host, Dan, the funny man, Croce. What's happening over there today, Dan?
Oh, man. Tell you what, I'm doing well. This was a crazy week in Pittsburgh, though. I expect that Arun, our guest, would have heard of this, but we had storms. We had a Category 1 hurricane registered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania this week. And so it's crazy. Stuff is everywhere. All my trees in my yard are broken. But it got me thinking, in a crazy weather week, I had a joke for you I wanted to tell, as I often do. So how many Andrew Reicherts does it take to change a light bulb?
Oh, gosh. I don't know how many, Dan.
It doesn't matter because Andrew Reichert doesn't have electricity in his house. But
Too soon.
Where are you going on like 4 days with no power?
4 days without electricity, and they're telling us it's going to be like 3 or 4 more. So my girls are freaking out at home.
That is so brutal. Yeah,
I'm trying to use it as a teaching opportunity. I'm like, hey, look, my grandparents, this is how they lived every day. So get used to it. But no, it's been brutal. But on the brighter side of things, we have electricity at our office. So we still get to do this podcast. And I'm so excited for our guest, Arun Gupta. We've known for years. He is CEO of NobleReach. He's been a friend of our firm for just about 10 years now, almost an entire decade we've known Arun. He's really a leader in mission-driven innovation. He's the author of an incredible book. It's called Venture Meets Mission. He talks all about aligning people, purpose, and profit to innovate and transform society. Just little goals like innovating and transforming society are the things that Arun is up to. But what I love about him is he has this venture capitalism background and has done a lot in that space, but he also thinks deeply about impact and transforming worlds and nonprofit. And so I'm so excited to have him on the show. Arun, welcome. Thanks for being here. Can you just maybe say a couple words about yourself? What are you up to? How did you get into that space?
Oh, Andrew and Daniel, thank you for having me. And then look at the friendship with you both over these years have been meaningful. So I appreciate the conversation. My background here has been, look, I grew up in DC, so public service has been in my family for 45 years. My dad's been in the Navy. I started my career was in venture capital, so Carlisle and Columbia Capital, which is where I spent my time, and got to see the power of entrepreneurship to solve problems. And the latter half of that was at the intersection of mission, tech, and entrepreneurship. And in that saw the power of bringing the venture ecosystem to government to solve big problems, but also the challenges in making that work. I then started teaching at Georgetown at Stanford. I was teaching a class called Valley Meets Mission, which is how you take the entrepreneurial spirit of the Valley and tie it to DC. And in that saw that, students were kind of grappling with this notion of like a artificial binary choice that we've given them with our vernacular, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit, for-profit. One's about doing good, the other one's about making money. And we haven't given them a language to talk about something in between, which is doing both. And so that led to kind of writing about venture and mission, which is in the book, Venture Meets Mission. And around that now, we have a foundation that has close to $500 million endowment. And we're trying to put some of the things that we talk about in the book to work. And at the highest of levels, it's that in our country, what we do, our superpowers are that we create talent better than anywhere else in the world. And we innovate better than anywhere else in the world. What we haven't really invested in over a few decades is the infrastructure to connect that top talent and that top change makers or top entrepreneurs to want to collaborate with government to solve problems at scale. And that there's a role that government plays in that, especially if we're talking about national security, economic security, climate security, food security. And, how do we rekindle that? And so when we think about what we're doing at NobleReach is trying to build an institution that is able to do that. And that's how we're leaning in.
Amazing. Can you, for the benefit of our audience, just give us a quick rundown of the NobleReach organization itself? So what are the actual activities that go on inside the walls of the organization, and sort of how do you succinctly think about this is the strategic objective of NobleReach?
Yeah, so I think, we have three, call them, initiatives that we're trying to drive to market. The first is a talent initiative. Like, how do we inspire our top tech talent to think about public service? If you look at where we are today as a country, less than 7% of our tech workers are under the age of 30. We have 4 times as many over the age of 60. So we're upside down, and we need to, we believe that that's going to be important, think about how we fix that. And, our view on that is that there's not a demand issue. I think people want to say that these students today or this generation doesn't care about public service. And I think we're taking a different tact. Our tact is that these students actually do deeply care. They just don't know how to find these opportunities, and they don't know how to find their way in and make it easy for them. An anecdote I would give you is kind of, I had 2 Stanford students, both female, one selected to do Teach for America and the other one selected to do a government program. And the one going into government tells her friend she's going to go into government. Her friends go, "Why would you do that? Why would you do that when you could do all these other things in the Valley?" The other one was selected to do Teach for America. And her friends go, "Wow, that's amazing. You're going to serve, you're going to give back, and then you can go do whatever you want." And the power of that vignette is that many times people say, like, "Oh, the reason people aren't going into government is because, there's not money there." And the idea is that, well, they're going into teaching or Teach for America, and that program has half as many, you'd be making half as much. So it's something deeper, actually. It's about the prestige. It's about respect with your peers, that your peers think this is a cool thing to do, and that it's viewed as a career enhancer. And that if you can create a program where demonstrate the latter 3 things, we could start to kind of unlock that orientation of students wanting to go into government service. And that's what we're trying to push. And so we say inside, we're trying to rally folks from how do we go from why, like, why do we do this, to wow, you got selected to do this, right? And I think when you're young, that that reaction at the point of contact is everything. It's valuable, because if your peers think, wow, you got selected to do that, that means something for you. So that's the narrative that we're trying to change there. On the science to venture side, what we're trying to do is how do we connect our top entrepreneurs, those that have done well, but now want to have impact. And how do we connect them to opportunities around federally funded research? So if you look at work we've done with DARPA, NSF, and now universities that have federally funded research, what can we do along those lines? And that's something that we're now exploring. So we've done about like 80 of these over the course of 3 years, which is connecting where our partners identify research of national interest, researchers doing that research, and then how do we connect them to entrepreneurs to help bring them to life and commercialize it? That doesn't mean all of them work. A third work, a third don't, and a third fail. But at least we're getting more at-bats as a country around research that otherwise would be sitting up on the shelf, as opposed to having ways that, could benefit society. And when you look at something like Operation Warp Speed, it's a good example. That really started with government research, with mRNA research that Moderna was able to bring to market. And so it's that example. Like, we're able to do this in times of crisis, but how do we make this the norm of how we innovate as a country?
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I love that concept of changing the narrative and giving vocabulary to the next generation of talent to think differently about the arcs of their careers and how they can go about, making a dent in the universe and making money. I mean, I that resonates with me deeply on a personal level. So I imagine that, this next generation of talent, like, I want that for my kids. So I love that. I think that's a really beautiful mission. I'm curious, you are now in a role where you are explicitly, wanting to solve societal problems and move the needle for society at large. In your career as someone who allocated capital and invested professionally, did you have the ability to were you thinking from that paradigm as you were making investment decisions and sitting on boards? Were you approaching, were the firms that you were a part of, aligned with that? Or were you strictly, thinking about how do I make the best return I can possibly make? How did that play out for you over your career?
The answer is kind of a combination, in short. I mean, what I mean by that is, what we were doing as a firm was always trying to maximize profit. There's no doubt. And returns for our investors, 'cause that's why our investors gave us, money for our funds. What shifted for me, though, was the realization that this isn't about either or, but it's an and. Like, where can you find opportunities where doing more mission-driven work actually creates more profit, creates more value? And that can be the sector you invest in. That could be health tech. That could be national security. In my case, it was cybersecurity, where we were building cybersecurity solutions that were ultimately being consumed by, different agencies inside the DoD and playing a valuable role in our nation's national security. And for me, the ability to see being able to create value and point capitalism towards that versus kind of creating Candy Crush 3.0, right? Another way to create value was just more fulfilling. It was more purposeful. And I didn't feel I had to make a trade-off, creating profit in the process. And so I think in the book, that's what we try to posit, Dan and Andrew, is that this isn't about like doing good. It means you can't do well. It's about like, how do we point capitalism, which is, arguably what has made America what it is, but point it to solving societal problems. And it's okay if people do well in that process. I mean, I'll go back to the Operation Warp Speed example of Moderna. Part of why I think that worked is the government's, laid out an outcome that they were looking for. Anyone that could, develop a vaccine that's FDA approved will buy X $100 million, X 100 million of them. And then the private sector can then mobilize and do what they're good at, which is allocating resources, capital, talent, research to go do that at the best they can. And, immense value was created, but both for society and the shareholders.
I love that. I think Andrew and I have, slid into a realization in our business that it's not only possible, but it's likely that by doing the right thing in our case, this is, it's interaction with our residents, we actually improve the quality of our buildings and we ultimately drive better returns. In fact, our mutual friend coined the phrase superior returns through superior service when he heard us describe our business. So that totally resonates with us. I'm thinking something I'm curious about in the NobleReach context is metrics and how you grade yourself, how you gauge your own success. So how do you think about, is it working? Are we doing what we're trying to do? And how do we know?
Yeah, I mean, early on for us, it really is about, can we place scholars into government, right? And have we been successful? In our first cohort, we were able to place 19 scholars. And so I think that gave us, a starting point. And then can we continue to grow that footprint? Our vantage point is like, can we scale? And that's what we're looking to do, is kind of continue to scale it. So this year we're looking to do 30 to 40, but not only in federal agencies, but state governments, local governments as well. And that's very meaningful for us. And so I think that's a critical role for what we're trying to do. And, our ability to ensure that the scholars are successful, that they're having a great experience inside. So we measure that. And then, we haven't gotten to our first cohort, but we plan to measure their success after the program and follow that. And so we need more longitudinal activity on that front. I think the second piece is on the science to venture piece. It's, again, how do we measure the number of technologies where we've been able to connect them to entrepreneurs and pull them out, and then what their success looks like afterwards, right? Were they able to raise capital? Were they able to deploy products and things of that sort? So those are there. It's a little bit more tangible. And then the third area has been academic as we build out curriculum. Like, how can we build out curriculum that we put out to universities and the number of students that get impacted by that curriculum as well?
Good stuff. Can we pivot for a moment to the book? I want to hear a little bit more about how that came together, who you wrote it with, and what that kind of partnership looks like, and what's your vision for how that the message of it kind of percolates its way into the marketplace?
Yeah. As far as the book goes, it was an offshoot of my class, right? And the observations from what I was seeing. And then it was an aggregation of, conversations with people from my network and then, derivatives of people in their networks that spanned academic, industry, and government, and looking at, how we need to get these three institutions to collaborate more effectively and what are the ways to do that. My co-authors I'd met at Georgetown. One was a dean at the business school, and the second one was of entrepreneurship, and the second one was a postdoc. So Jerry George and Tom Pure. And in sharing some of the observations that I was seeing in my Stanford class, that's what got us to think about, writing that together.
And then what is your strategy, or what's your thought on how you take that message and, get it to have momentum out there in the marketplace? I'm generally seeing more activity around these kinds of concepts, but what's your vision for how to keep momentum or to grow the momentum behind the movement of the message of the book?
Yeah, so I think there's three aspects to it. It is the three sectors that we're kind of talking to: academic, government, and industry. On the academic side, we're out there talking to universities and students, both with our curriculum, but around, talks about the importance of this. And in doing that, how do we inspire this generation, more importantly? And this year we had over 1,300 students apply to the program, which was for us a signal of the interest that's there. And we want to continue to see that going. On the government side, it's, continuing to maybe highlight for them what the art of the possible is, what kind of students are interested, who they are, and then identify ways that we might be able to collaborate and ways we might be able to work with them. And so I think that's an important piece of it as well. And then with industry partners, they play an important role. We're not collecting money from them. We're not doing anything in that context. But I think what we are trying to do with industry partners is highlight for them, how can we have them in our orbit? That's an important demand signal to validate that the type of programs that our students would be going through are something that would be valued by them. And these are the kinds of students they'd want to hire. And so we're growing that piece of the program in a meaningful way. So that's what we're looking to do, and then, there's the fourth group, which are other not-for-profits, which are more ecosystem partners. How can they help us amplify the message, get it out there to thought leaders and groups. But really, we're focused on, academic, government, and industry partners.
Awesome. Well, I learned so much from that. It's very inspiring work. I have a ton more questions that are running through my head, but I'm looking at the time here, and I think we probably have to start to transition over to the lightning round. So thank you. Just learned so much, and it's super motivating, inspiring, and honestly, one of the places I go with it is, I'm guessing our organization is probably not significant enough in size and scope to be on the industry partners list, but I wonder what that looks like, because I think an organization like ours would love to engage with that type of thinking and just kind of
I appreciate that, Dan and Andrew. And, I think that's been one of the most heartening things about this process with the people that we have interacted with, Republicans, Democrats, private sector folks, people in academia. Everyone's had the same question. And that question is, how can we help? And to me, that kind of speaks to the moment we're in right now. And I think that's my motivation, which is that there is a real sense from folks that, we need to do things differently. We need to think about how we collaborate more effectively. How do we rebuild trust? I mean, if I look at what the long game is and what we're doing, it really is about how do we create more dual citizens? We penned an op-ed that's in the U.S. News. We'll report this week about the need to create more dual citizens, and dual citizens being public-private sector citizens, people that understand both worlds. And the underlying thesis there is that, a lot of the trust deficit that we see right now is because people stay in their silo, and it's easy to demonize a group that you've never been part of, right? But when you actually have been part of that group, or people that are in that group, and you humanize it, you realize that a lot of the stereotypes fall apart. And much like Teach for America, 80% of people aren't going in and necessarily becoming teachers over time, but they are staying connected to public education. Wouldn't it be great if we had a country where people may not necessarily need to go into public, decide they want to be a public servant for their career, but they stay engaged to public service, right? Because once you've been once you've been engaged in some capacity, you at least understand both the benefits of what it can do, and you have a desire to want to continue to improve it. And so that's a bit of what we're trying to pose and what we're doing with the foundation in the book.
Well, I think it's fascinating, like Dan said, and I know that you're going to have a huge impact in RDR. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, but without getting into a political conversation, obviously there have been some cuts made recently, and you having grown up and been in the sort of public sector right there outside of DC. I'm just wondering, is that impacting you at all? Do you have a perspective to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think the the cuts definitely create a perception headwind, if nothing else, right? People wondering there's, what's happening. And, I think it creates a level of paralysis, but it hasn't changed the energy from new students wanting to go in based on what we're seeing with, our applicant pool. We are seeing a group of folks that feel like this could also be the opportunity for them to have more impact and being able to be given more responsibility, if they're on the inside. I think the hard part, if I'm honest about it, is just language, right? Words matter, spirit matters, right? And dignity matters, right? And feeling like it's less about the cuts, but it's how you treat people through that process. We've all been, when you're in the venture world, you've been around a lot of cuts because not all your companies go up and to the right. But an important lesson you learn from that is that, you have to thank people for their service. You have to say these are difficult decisions that we have to make. I mean, you have to treat people with dignity. And that's, I think the piece that, hopefully we'll be able to learn from in this process.
Yeah, well said. And I wanted our guests to hear your perspective on that, or our listeners, because I think that you have a unique way of kind of showing that care and that empathy in what you do. So along those lines, we're going to jump into the lightning round, which is kind of get to know you personally beyond some of the professional endeavors that you do. So can you tell us what you would consider as your biggest win? Could be personal, could be professional, but what would you say is your biggest win?
Yeah, I mean, that one's easy. I mean, that would be my family. Look, I think I've got the privilege of being able to say I'll be married next year, 30 years to my wife, which is a huge win. And, I have 3 great kids that I'm proud of. And so for me, by far, that's the biggest win.
Yeah, awesome. How about a favorite movie?
God, I'd probably say maybe Field of Dreams. I'm a little bit of a sports guy, but there's that, nostalgic kind of parent, kid, passing things on that hit a chord when I watched it.
Yeah, very good. Favorite food?
I love Indian food, so I'd probably say like a good curry chicken. Yeah, chicken curry masala.
Good stuff. What's the current growth edge, a way that you're trying to grow personally, professionally?
Yeah, look, for me right now, it's really getting out and just talking to folks. I feel like I learn best talking to folks in different spheres that are outside of like the spheres I operate in. And in hearing their perspective, that could be both generational, that could be socioeconomic, that could be cultural. I think one of the most fun pieces of what we're doing is having this as a platform to be able to engage with those different communities and being able to take that in and then trying to, make sense of it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very wise words. What's some really good, like A+ content that you're taking in these days? Could be books, podcasts. What are you consuming?
I read a lot of Arthur Brooks' stuff. I find him to be, in a world where we're kind of always go, 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 this sense of like happiness and where that fits in and wellness and how that integrates into kind of success. I think, Strength to Strength has been a book that I took a lot out of about like how do you kind of create that second chapter and his writing around that.
Yeah, so good. If folks want to get in touch with you, whether learn more about NobleReach or maybe pick up your book, what's a good way to get in touch with you?
Arun.Gupta at NobleReach, all one word, F as in Frank, D as in Derry, N as in Nancy, FDN.org.
Awesome. Well, Arun, thank you so much for being on our show. Again, known you almost for a decade now. It's amazing just to see what you're doing and honored to get to be in your orbit, so to speak. So thank you for being on the show. Thank you to all of our listeners for listening in. I'm sure you were as impacted by this as I was, and we'll catch you all next time.
Sounds good. The feeling's mutual. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Real Returns Podcast. We hope that you learned something new about how you can invest to make a lasting impact on those around you. Please be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, leave us a review, and share about us on social media. We hope you will join us for our next episode, where we will be continuing the conversation around impactful real estate investing.